One whale, 6 months of food, 300 people fed through the harshest winter storms. This isn't a survival fantasy. It's exactly what the Makah Nation achieved for 4,000 years along the Pacific Northwest coast. While modern food systems need daily deliveries just to keep remote villages alive, the Makah people turned a single 40-ton grey whale into 8,000 pounds of meat, oil and life-saving materials. No refrigeration, no supply trucks, just ancient wisdom that worked better than anything we've created since. Go back to a cold morning in the 1700s at Cape Flattery, the extreme northwest corner of what we now call Washington State. The sky is still dark. Waves crash against black rocks. Inside the longhouses, 8 hunters prepare for the most dangerous hunt on Earth. These men aren't hoping for success. They're following a system tested and improved over thousands of years. A system so smart that US Coast Guard instructors still study it today. A system that elite military survival teachers show to Navy SEALs. Why? Because when your life depends on the ocean, the Makah people figured out tricks that modern technology still can't beat. Here's the shocking math that changes everything. Modern emergency food systems for remote Alaskan villages cost millions in helicopter deliveries every year. One Makah whale hunt, using only wooden tools and human power, delivered more high-quality protein than 6 months of modern supply flights. Marine biologists at the University of Washington studied this and couldn't believe the efficiency. One hunt. Half a year of complete food security for 300 people. Compare that to today, when disaster strikes and supply chains break down. Modern communities panic within 72 hours. The Makah Nation? They built a system that could weather any storm, any failed harvest, any long winter, and they did it without a single piece of metal, without engines, without GPS. Just 8 men, 1 wooden canoe, and then the canoe alone tells you everything about Makah intelligence. No metal, no power tools, just fire, stone blades and knowledge passed from grandfather to grandson for 200 generations. The design is so brilliant that modern boat engineers study the hull shape to understand stability. The weight distribution is so precise that 8 men can paddle in perfect silence. See the lead hunter standing in the bow. His harpoon is 18 feet of flexible yew-wood. The blade isn't steel, it's a mussel shell, ground sharper than any modern surgical knife. Material scientists tested these shells and found edges finer than razor blades. Tied to the harpoon is 600 feet of hand-braided elk sinew rope, stronger than most synthetic lines you can buy today. Those sealskin floats attached to the harpoon line? Each one was carefully sewn, waterproofed with natural oils, and inflated to exactly the right size. Too big and they'd create too much drag, too small and they'd be useless. The Makah people calculated the perfect balance without computers or textbooks. They just watched, tested, and learned it over centuries. Military team coordination experts now study how these 8 men work together. They moved as one unit, no shouting, no arguing, no confusion. Hand signals only. Every man knew his exact role. The lead harpooner didn't paddle, the steersman controlled direction with micro-adjustments. The 6 paddlers synchronized every stroke so perfectly that the canoe moved like a hunting cat. Silent, smooth, deadly efficient. Modern special operations teams train for years to achieve this level of coordination. The Makah people started learning as children and practiced until it became instinct. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who studies traditional maritime cultures, says the Makah hunting crew showed communication efficiency that most modern teams never achieve. They had to. One mistake in the open ocean facing a 40-ton whale meant everyone could die. So they eliminated mistakes through perfect preparation and flawless teamwork. The hunt itself was just one piece of a much bigger system. Before the canoe ever launched, spiritual leaders performed ceremonies to show respect. The entire village played a role. Spotters watched for migrating whales. Rope makers prepared hundreds of feet of line. Float makers tested every seal carefully. And after a successful hunt, the real genius showed. Every part of that whale got used. Meat, blubber, oil, bones, spleen, organs, nothing wasted. The Makah people developed preservation methods that kept food fresh for months without refrigeration. They created a distribution system that made sure everyone in the village got fed, from the bolest child to the oldest elder. Modern emergency preparedness experts study Makah resource management because it solved problems we still struggle with today. How do you store massive amounts of food without electricity? How do you distribute resources fairly when everyone's survival depends on it? How do you create systems that work for generations without falling apart? The Makah Nation answered all these questions 4,000 years ago, and their answers worked so well that the US Coast Guard teaches Makah wave reading techniques for small boat navigation in extreme conditions. Sustainable fishing cooperatives model their resource-sharing systems on Makah traditional practices. Wilderness survival schools study their zero-waste food processing methods. This isn't ancient history locked in museums, this is living knowledge. The Makah Nation resumed traditional whaling in 1999 after a 70-year break, exercising rights protected by the 1855 Treaty of Neah Bay. The techniques, the wisdom, the heritage, it all survived because the Makah people kept it alive through generations. In this video, you'll learn the exact cooperative hunting strategies that let 8 humans hunt 40-ton whales safely. You'll discover risk distribution systems that kept Makah hunters alive in the most dangerous conditions on Earth. You'll see zero-waste processing methods that turned every ounce of a whale into something useful. And you'll understand community resource management principles that work for modern emergency planning. Whether you're a team leader, an emergency preparedness planner, a small boat operator, or just someone who wants to understand how our ancestors solved impossible problems, this knowledge will change how you think about survival, cooperation, and human intelligence. But these techniques didn't emerge overnight. To understand why Makah methods succeeded where others failed, we need to explore 4,000 years of maritime innovation forged by one of the Pacific's harshest environments. What environmental pressures created such sophisticated survival systems? How did the Makah people develop skills that modern technologies still can't fully replicate? The answers reveal a culture of genius that most people never learn about. Let's dive deep into their world. The Makah people call themselves Quiditja, ATX, the people of the Cape. For 4,000 years they've lived at Cape Flattery, the northwesternmost point of the contiguous United States, where the Pacific Ocean slams into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. This isn't just geography, it's one of the most dangerous marine environments on Earth, and the Makah Nation didn't just survive here, they thrived. Stand at Cape Flattery today and you'll feel the power. Wind screams across the rocks, waves 20 feet high explode into spray, rain falls 100 inches per year, that's more than 8 feet of water from the sky. Winter storms rage for weeks without stopping. The ocean temperature stays cold year-round, meaning if you fall in, you have minutes before hypothermia kills you. Behind the coast, the land offers its own challenges. Rocky terrain makes farming almost impossible. The forest is so thick you can barely walk through it. Deer and elk exist, but hunting them in this dense undergrowth is extremely difficult. The Makah people looked at this harsh environment and made a choice: master the ocean or starve. So they mastered it. Not just survival, absolute mastery. The Makah Nation developed such sophisticated ocean knowledge that their culture became completely maritime. They built 5 permanent villages along the coast: Neah Bay, Azet, Watch, Suze, and Bahada. At their peak, 2,000 to 4,000 people lived in these communities. Sustained entirely by ocean resources, think about that. 4,000 people living comfortably without agriculture, without metal tools, in one of the harshest climates imaginable. How? They turned the ocean into their garden. Grey whales migrated right past their shores every spring, travelling within 3 to 5 miles of the coast. Seals and sea lions hauled out on nearby rocks. Salmon ran thick in the coastal rivers. Halibut, rockfish, and shellfish filled the waters. But the whales were the key. One successful hunt could feed 300 people for 6 months. So the Makah people spent 4,000 years perfecting every aspect of whale hunting until it became the most sophisticated maritime tradition in the pre-industrial world. In 1970, something remarkable happened. A massive mudslide buried part of the ancient village of Ozet. But this wasn't a tragedy for archaeologists. It was a miracle. The mud created an oxygen-free environment that preserved organic materials perfectly. When researchers excavated the site over the next 11 years, they found 55,000 artifacts in near-perfect condition. Walk through the Makah Cultural and Research Centre today and you'll see these artifacts. Whaling harpoons with their razor-sharp mussel shell points. Sealskin floats still waterproof after 5 centuries. Cedar ropes braided so tightly they haven't rotted. Massive longhouses 60 feet long with carved posts showing whale designs, storage boxes that held preserved whale meat and oil. Dr. Ruth Kirkvoe, who documented the Ozette excavation, said the preservation was so perfect that archaeologists found food still inside cooking boxes. They found children's toys. They found the exact tools used for every step of whale processing. The site revealed something most people never understood. The Makah people weren't primitive hunter-gatherers. They were sophisticated maritime specialists with technology perfected over millennia. The dating on these artifacts shocked researchers. Radiocarbon testing showed continuous occupation at Ozette going back 3,800 years. But evidence from other Makah sites pushes the timeline even further. Over 4,000 years of continuous maritime culture in the same location. To put that in perspective, that's longer than the Egyptian pyramids have existed. That's twice as long as Rome has been a city. That's 200 generations of grandparents teaching grandchildren the exact same skills, refined and improved with each passing lifetime. Village life revolved around maritime cycles. From February through May, everyone focused on the grey whale migration. Hunters prepared spiritually and physically for months before the season. Equipment was checked and rechecked. When whales appeared offshore, the entire community shifted into high gear. Summer meant salmon runs, halibut fishing, and seal hunting. Fall brought preparations for winter, preserving food, repairing houses, gathering firewood. Winter was for maintenance, storytelling, and teaching young people the skills they'd need. Every season had its purpose, nothing was wasted. Every person had specialized knowledge that served the community. The hereditary whaling chief system shows how sophisticated Makah culture really was. Certain families held the hereditary right to lead whale hunts. These chiefs didn't get the position because they were strong or lucky. They inherited it because their families had proven excellence for generations, and they trained for it from early childhood. A young chief in training started learning at age 5 or 6. He'd practiced throwing harpoons at targets on the beach. He'd learned to read ocean conditions by studying waves with his elders. He'd memorize whale behavior patterns passed down through oral tradition. He'd build physical strength and endurance through constant training. He'd learn the spiritual practices required to show proper respect. This training lasted 15 to 20 years before a young man was ready to stand in the bow of a whaling canoe. Even then, he'd start as a paddler, working his way up through the crew positions. Only after proving himself in multiple hunts would he earn the right to throw the first harpoon. The Makah people understood that mastery takes time. They built systems to ensure knowledge passed down perfectly from generation to generation. The first Europeans arrived in Makah territory in the 1790s, Spanish and British expeditions exploring the Pacific coast. These outsiders were amazed by what they found. The Makah people had cedar houses bigger than European cottages. They wore woven clothing that shed rain perfectly. Their canoes handled ocean conditions that terrified European sailors. And they hunted whales, something European whalers did with large ships and dozens of men. On January 31st, 1855, the Makah nations signed the Treaty of Neah Bay with the United States government. This wasn't a surrender, it was a negotiation. The Makah people gave up some territory in exchange for guaranteed rights, and they made absolutely certain that one right was written explicitly into the treaty, the right of taking fish and of whaling or sealing at usual, and accustomed grounds and stations is further secured to said Indians. That treaty language matters because the Makah people knew exactly what they were doing. They secured their maritime heritage in writing protected by US law. That protection would prove critical 140 years later. In the 1920s and 1930s, industrial commercial whaling nearly destroyed grey whale populations. Factory ships with explosive harpoons killed whales by the thousands. Grey whales, the species the Makah people had sustainably hunted for 4,000 years, nearly went extinct. The population crashed from hundreds of thousands to fewer than 2,000 animals. The Makah nation made the painful decision to stop hunting voluntarily. They didn't want to contribute to the destruction. For 70 years, from the 1920s until 1999, no Makah whaling canoes launched. An unbroken 4,000-year tradition went silent. Elders who knew the old ways grew old. Equipment sat unused. Songs and ceremonies continued, but the actual practice stopped. But grey whales recovered. Conservation efforts worked. By the 1990s, the Eastern Pacific grey whale population had climbed back to healthy levels, over 20,000 animals. The Makah Nation had honoured the 1855 treaty. The US government had an obligation to honour it too. In 1999, after years of preparation and approval from the International Whaling Commission, the Makah Nation exercised their treaty rights. On May the 17th, a crew led by whaling captain Wayne Johnson successfully hunted a grey whale using traditional methods, the first in 70 years. The tradition lived again. That 1999 hunt sparked controversy. Animal rights groups protested. Media coverage was intense, but the International Whaling Commission, the global authority on whale conservation, supported the Makah Nation's right to hunt. Why? Because scientists studied Makah traditional practices and found them to be among the most sustainable whaling methods ever developed. Makah oral tradition included strict quotas, taking only what the community needed. Hunters showed deep respect for the whales, viewing them as gifts rather than resources to exploit. The hunting techniques themselves, while effective, meant that only a small number of whales were taken each year. Over 4,000 years, this sustainable practice never threatened the whale population. Only industrial commercial whaling did that. Today, the Makah Cultural and Research Centre preserves this heritage. Elders teach young people the old ways. Researchers from around the world come to study Makah maritime knowledge. The culture continues, living, breathing, adapting. This cultural foundation, 4,000 years of knowledge, passed from generation to generation, tested against the harshest ocean conditions, refined through centuries of experience, created the world's most sophisticated pre-industrial whale hunting system. Now we'll break down exactly how it worked. How did 8 men in a wooden canoe successfully hunt a creature weighing more than 50 humans combined? How did they turn impossible odds into reliable food security? The techniques you're about to learn will change how you understand human capability forever. Building a whale hunting canoe started in the forest, not on the beach. Makah master canoe builders walked through ancient cedar groves looking for one specific tree. It had to be massive, 8 to 10 feet across at the base. It had to be straight, with no twist in the trunk. And it had to be old growth with tight grain that wouldn't split under ocean stress. When the right tree was found, ceremonies showed respect. The builder explained to the tree why it was needed, to feed the people, to continue the tradition. Then the careful work began. Using stone axes and controlled fire, teams of men could fell a giant cedar in several days. The trunk was cut to 36 feet, the perfect length for stability and maneuverability. Hollowing the canoe required patience and incredible skill. Builders started controlled fires inside the log to char the wood, then scraped away the burnt material with adze blades. Too much fire and you'd burn through the hull, too little and the process took forever. The goal was a hull wall 3 to 4 inches thick, strong enough to handle massive waves but light enough to paddle efficiently. Modern marine engineers study these canoes and discover something remarkable. The hull shape creates exceptional stability in rough water. The cedar wood flexes slightly, absorbing wave impact instead of fighting it. Computer modelling shows that Makah canoe designs could handle 20-foot swells that would capsize many modern small boats. Dr. James Wilson, a naval architect at the University of British Columbia, tested traditional canoe designs against modern rescue boats. His team found that the Makah design had a superior stability-to-speed ratio. The carved bow cut through waves with minimal resistance. The stern design allowed precise steering with a single paddle. The width-to-length ratio created a platform stable enough for a man to stand and throw a heavy harpoon, while the canoe moved through ocean swells. But the raw canoe was too narrow, only about 3 feet wide when first hollowed. Steam bending solved this. Builders filled the canoe with water, then dropped in fire-heated rocks. The steam softened the cedar, allowing them to slowly spread the sides apart using wooden braces. The beam widened to 5 or 6 feet, creating the interior space needed for 8 men and their equipment. The wood was held in this new shape as it dried, permanently maintaining the wider form. Maintenance was constant. Seal oil applied regularly kept the cedar from drying and cracking. Small splits were repaired immediately. Before and after every hunt, the entire hull was inspected for damage. A Makah whaling canoe might last 30 years with proper care. Hundreds of hunts, countless miles of ocean travel. The harpoon system was equally sophisticated. The main shaft was yew-wood, 18 feet of straight, dense wood, chosen for its combination of flexibility and strength. Yew could bend without breaking, absorbing the shock when a harpoon struck a whale moving through water. But the real innovation was the detachable head. The harpoon point wasn't permanently attached to the shaft. Instead, it was designed to separate on impact and toggle sideways inside the whale's body. This toggle action created an anchor that couldn't pull out. The more the whale pulled, the more firmly the head locked in place. Material scientists have studied the mussel shell blades used for these harpoon points and found something incredible. The molecular structure of certain mussel shell species creates an edge sharper than modern surgical steel. Under microscopic examination, these shells maintain a cutting edge measured in nanometers. That's millionths of a millimeter. Steel blades dull quickly because the edge collapses at a microscopic level. Properly prepared mussel shell maintains its sharpness far longer. The harpoon line was braided elk sinew, or specially processed cedar bark, 600 feet or more per hunt. This line had to be incredibly strong yet flexible enough to coil without kinking. Makah rope makers tested every strand, discarding anything with weak spots. A broken line meant a lost whale, wasted effort, and potential danger for the crew. The float system was pure genius. Each hunt used 4 to 6 sealskin floats, each holding 40 to 60 gallons of air. When a harpoon struck home, hunters immediately threw these floats overboard, attached to the harpoon line. As the whale dove or tried to swim away, the floats created massive drag, like trying to run while dragging parachutes. Crew selection and training took years. The 8-man team wasn't just 8 strong paddlers. Each position required specific skills. The harpooner stood in the bow, the most prestigious and dangerous position, usually held by a hereditary chief. Steersmen controlled direction from the stern, reading waves and making constant tiny adjustments. The 6 paddlers provided power, but more importantly they moved in perfect synchronization. Training started in childhood. Boys began learning ocean conditions at age 5 or 6. They memorized wave patterns, wind signs, current indicators. They practiced paddling until synchronized strokes became instinctive. No thought required, just muscle memory. They learned to read whale behavior by watching from shore, understanding how grey whales surfaced, where they travelled, how they reacted to disturbances. Physical conditioning was intense. Hunting crews ran along the beach, strengthening legs and lungs. They practiced throwing weighted spears at targets, building the shoulder and core strength needed to drive an 18-foot harpoon into a moving whale. They swam in the cold Pacific water, conditioning their bodies to function in hypothermic conditions. But perhaps most important was learning to work in complete silence. In the ocean, sound travels incredibly well underwater. Whales can hear human voices from hundreds of yards away. A successful approach required absolute noise discipline. Crews developed an entire language of hand signals. A slight finger motion meant adjust course left. A closed fist meant stop paddling. A pointed finger indicated direction to a whale spout. Spiritual preparation was just as important as physical training. The days before a hunt involved fasting, prayer, and cleansing rituals. These practices served multiple purposes. They showed respect for the whale, they created mental focus, and they built crew unity. Modern sports psychologists study these preparation protocols and find them remarkably similar to visualization and mindfulness techniques used by elite athletes today. Launch timing was critical. Pre-dawn departures meant being in position when whales began their morning surface activity. Grey whales feed at night on the ocean bottom, then rise to breathe more frequently in early morning hours. Crews positioned themselves along known migration routes, reading the water for signs. The ocean itself told experienced hunters everything they needed to know. Current direction showed in the drift of kelp and foam. Wave patterns revealed underwater topography, where shallow reefs created choppy water, where deep channels ran smooth. Wind indicators included surface ripples, spray patterns, even the way seabirds flew. When a whale spout appeared, that explosive spray when a grey whale surfaces to breathe, the hunt began. The steersman angled the canoe on an approach vector, coming from behind and to the side where the whale's eyesight was weakest. Grey whales have eyes positioned on the sides of their heads, creating significant blind spots directly in front and behind. The paddlers went silent. Not a word, not a splash. The canoe glided forward on momentum between paddle strokes. Everyone breathed slowly, controlling even that sound. The distance closed, 50 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards. The whale surfaced again, blowing spray, completely unaware of the approaching canoe. The paddlers brought the canoe within 10 to 15 feet, close enough that the harpooner could strike with maximum force. The throw used whole-body mechanics. The harpooner didn't just use his arms, he drove upward from his legs, rotated his core, extended through his shoulders. The yew-wood shaft flexed like a whip, adding extra momentum. The mussel shell blade struck just behind the whale's head, targeting areas near vital organs. The whale's first reaction was always to dive or swim away powerfully. The harpoon line screamed out of its careful coils as 40 tons of animal tried to escape. Floats hit the water and immediately created drag. The whale pulled them underwater, but the air-filled sealskins wanted to rise. This created constant upward pressure and tremendous resistance. Modern hydrodynamic studies explain why this float system works so brilliantly. Water is 800 times denser than air. Pulling submerged floats through water requires enormous energy. A whale dragging 4 or 5 50-gallon floats faces resistance equivalent to several tons of force. It's like trying to sprint while towing cars. The whale couldn't sustain this effort. Each time it dove, the floats pulled it back toward the surface. Each time it tried to swim fast, the drag exhausted it. Meanwhile, the hunting canoe followed at a safe distance. When the whale showed signs of tiring, longer surface intervals, slower movements, less powerful dives, the crew moved in for additional harpoon placements. Secondary harpoons increased the float count and created multiple attachment points. These follow-up strikes required even more skill because the whale was now alert and agitated. But patient, careful approaches allowed experienced crews to place 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 harpoons before the final exhaustion phase. The final stage could take 6 to 12 hours from first strike. The whale gradually weakened as exhaustion overcame its strength. Eventually, it could no longer dive, could barely swim. The hunters moved in for the final procedures, a swift, respectful end to the hunt. The mouth sewing technique solved a critical problem. A dead whale with an open mouth would fill with water and sink. Whales are slightly denser than seawater, so without air in their lungs and body cavities, they naturally submerge. By sewing the mouth shut, hunters prevented water from filling the throat and stomach, keeping enough buoyancy to tow the carcass. This innovation shows the deep understanding Makah hunters had of physics and whale biology. Early European whalers struggled with sinking carcasses for decades before developing chain and hook systems. The Makah people solved the problem centuries earlier with simple, elegant rope work. Towing a 40-ton whale with wooden canoes required coordination between multiple crews. 2 or 3 canoes would attach towing lines and paddle in synchronized rhythm. The beach landing had to coordinate with tide cycles. Bringing the whale in during high tide meant it would be positioned perfectly for processing as the tide receded. Signal systems let shore crews know success had been achieved. Specific paddle patterns visible from miles away communicated the message. Smoke signals from the canoes confirmed. By the time the hunting crews arrived at the beach, the entire village was mobilized and ready. Processing a 40-ton whale required specialized knowledge and tools. Different families held hereditary rights to specific parts of the whale. The chief's family received certain cuts. Other families had rights to other sections. This distribution system ensured everyone in the village received shares, from the hunters who risked their lives to the elderly who could no longer work. Specialized cutting tools made the work efficient. Curved blades followed the contours of the whale's body. Long-handled knives reached deep into the carcass. Stone and shell tools stayed sharp through hours of cutting. The work continued around the clock, 24 to 48 hours of constant processing to fully utilize the whale before decomposition began. The zero-waste approach modern environmentalists praise wasn't just ethics, it was practical necessity. Meat was cut into strips for drying or immediate cooking. Blubber was rendered into oil for food, light, and waterproofing. Bones became tools, art, and structural materials. Baleen was crafted into fishing line and weaving materials. Intestines became containers. Sinew was processed into rope and thread. Modern sustainable resource researchers study Makah processing methods and find efficiency levels that surpass many industrial operations. A contemporary beef processing plant wastes 30 to 40% of each animal. Makah whale processing wasted essentially nothing. Every ounce of a 40-ton whale found use in the community. This complete utilization meant one successful hunt provided not just food, but materials for hundreds of other tasks. The oil alone, several hundred gallons from a single whale, was used for months. Dried meat could last 6 months or more when properly stored in cedar boxes. Bones provided material for tools that would be used for years. The entire system, from forest to ocean to beach, represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Every technique had been tested, refined, and perfected across hundreds of generations. Nothing was left to chance, nothing was wasted, and most importantly, nothing was taken beyond what the people needed and the whale population could sustain. This primary technique was just the foundation. Makah hunters developed dozens of sophisticated variations for different whale species, weather conditions, and seasonal challenges. What advanced methods separated master whalers from apprentices? How did they adapt these core techniques when conditions changed, when storms threatened, when different whale species appeared? The innovations we're about to explore show the true depth of Makah maritime genius, the expert-level skills that transformed good hunters into legends whose names are still spoken with respect today. The basic whale hunting technique worked brilliantly for grey whales, but grey whales weren't the only challenge in Makah waters. Occasionally a humpback whale appeared during migration season. These massive animals required completely different strategies. Humpback whales dive deeper, move less predictably, and behave far more aggressively when threatened. Humpback whales can dive to 600 feet or more, staying underwater for 15 to 20 minutes. Grey whales typically dive only 300 to 500 feet and surface every 3 to 5 minutes. This difference changed everything about the hunt. Crews targeting humpbacks needed larger floats, sometimes 8 or 10, instead of the usual 4 to 6. The drag had to be powerful enough to tire an animal with far greater endurance than grey whales. The approach angles changed too. Humpbacks have better peripheral vision than grey whales and react more quickly to threats. Hunting crews had to approach from directly behind, staying into the whale's blind spot for longer. The strike had to be perfect on the first attempt. Humpbacks spooked easily and could disappear into deep water within seconds. Only master-level crews attempted humpback hunts. The risk was significantly higher. A humpback's tail flukes could shatter a canoe with a single strike. Their unpredictable diving meant crews could lose sight of the whale for extended periods, making follow-up harpoon placements extremely difficult. And if something went wrong, if the line tangled, if a float failed, the consequences were deadly. Seal and sea lion hunting used completely different equipment. These smaller marine mammals required modified harpoons, lighter shafts of sound around 10 to 12 feet long, smaller detachable heads, thinner lines. The hunting strategies shifted from exhaustion to quick retrieval. A seal could be pulled alongside the canoe within minutes of successful strike. But seals were smart and extremely aware of predators. Hunting them required even more stealth than whale hunting. Crews would drift with currents, appearing to be just floating kelp or driftwood. When close enough, a single quick throw secured the catch. These hunts provided valuable protein during seasons when whales weren't migrating and kept hunting skills sharp year-round. Fog hunting represented the pinnacle of traditional maritime skill. When thick fog rolled in from the Pacific, which happened frequently, most crews stayed on shore, but master whalers saw opportunity. Whales continued their migration regardless of visibility. And in fog, if hunters couldn't see whales, whales couldn't see hunters approaching. Sound became everything. The blow of a surfacing whale could be heard from a quarter-mile away in still, foggy conditions. Experienced crews could distinguish between species by the sound. Grey whales had a distinctive heart-shaped blow that created a specific sound pattern. The direction and distance could be calculated by listening alone. Echo navigation added another layer of sophistication. In fog near rocky coastlines, crews would create sounds, a paddle tap on the canoe side, a sharp whistle, and listen for echoes bouncing off cliffs. This acoustic positioning system let them navigate safely despite zero visibility. Modern Coast Guard search and rescue units study these traditional fog navigation techniques for GPS failure protocols. Hand signals became even more critical in the fog. Crew members could barely see each other, so every gesture had to be precise and understood instantly. A system of rope tugs communicated between the harpooner in the bow and the steersman in the stern. One tug meant direction adjustment needed. 2 tugs meant whale spotted. 3 tugs meant prepare for strike. The risk was immense. In fog, if something went wrong, rescue was nearly impossible. Other canoes couldn't see you. The shore couldn't be located easily, but the reward matched the risk. Whales encountered in fog were often completely relaxed, unaware, making approaches easier for crews with the skill to find them. Night hunting was even rarer than fog hunting, reserved for the most elite crews and usually attempted only under specific conditions. But when necessary, master whalers could hunt in darkness using a combination of stellar navigation and one of nature's most remarkable phenomena, bioluminescence. Certain species of plankton emit light when disturbed by movement. A whale swimming through a plankton-rich water creates a glowing trail visible for hundreds of yards. Master hunters could track whales at night by following these luminescent disturbances. The size of the glow indicated the size of the animal. The pattern of disturbance showed swimming speed and direction. Stellar navigation provided positioning and direction. Makah navigator memorized the night sky completely, every constellation, every star path throughout the seasons. The North Star gave true north. Other stars marked east and west positions at different times of night. Experienced navigators could determine their position within a few hundred yards just by observing star positions and angles, but night hunting added dangers that daylight didn't. Judging distance to a whale was much harder in darkness. The strike had to rely more on sound and intuition than visual confirmation. And if the hunt extended past dawn, which happened frequently, crews faced the challenge of landing during daylight after exhausting night work. Historical accounts document night hunts primarily during full moon phases, when ambient light provided some visibility. The glowing plankton effect was strongest during dark moon phases, but made hunting more dangerous. Master whalers balanced these factors, choosing conditions carefully based on need, weather, and crew capability. Maritime historians studying pre-instrument seamanship consider Makah night navigation methods among the most sophisticated in any pre-industrial culture. Dr. Thomas Bradley, who researches traditional Pacific navigation, notes that Makah star knowledge rivals Polynesian wayfinding in complexity and practical application. Multi-day whale tracking represented ultimate patience and endurance. If a whale struck successfully but not fatally, and if the animal had enough strength to keep swimming despite the float drag, crews might track it for 48 to 72 hours before exhaustion finally stopped it. This required coordination between multiple hunting crews. One canoe couldn't sustain 72 hours of continuous pursuit. The paddlers would collapse from exhaustion before the whale did. So crews worked in shifts. One team actively followed the float markers while others rested, ate, and prepared for their turn. Signal systems coordinated the handoffs. The float markers themselves were ingeniously designed for long-distance tracking. Brightly decorated with clan symbols and specific colours, they could be spotted from several miles away in good visibility. If one float was lost or damaged during the extended chase, others remained attached, ensuring the tracking line stayed intact. These extended hunts tested every aspect of traditional knowledge. Crews had to navigate far from shore, sometimes 10 or 15 miles out into the open Pacific. They had to manage their own food, water and energy while maintaining constant focus on the whale. They had to predict the whale's movement patterns, positioning themselves to intercept rather than constantly chasing from behind. Weather changes during multi-day hunts added complexity. A hunt starting in calm conditions might encounter fog, wind, or rain before completion. Crews carried emergency supplies and had backup protocols for every situation. The knowledge required to successfully complete a 72-hour hunt represented decades of accumulated experience. Storm hunting was the most dangerous practice in Makah whaling tradition and the rarest. It only happened when village food supplies ran critically low during winter months and no alternatives existed. The risk was so extreme that only hereditary chiefs with decades of experience would attempt it, and only with the strongest, most trusted crews. The physics of storm hunting worked both for and against the hunters. On one hand, massive swells made canoe handling incredibly difficult. A mistimed wave could capsize the vessel instantly. Visibility was terrible. Communication was nearly impossible over howling wind, and if something went wrong, no rescue was coming. But storms also brought advantages. Whales struggled in extreme conditions too. Heavy seas disrupted their normal breathing patterns, forcing them to surface more frequently in predictable locations, the brief calm spots between major swells. The noise of wind and crashing waves masked the approaching canoe sounds completely. Modern small boat safety training studies these traditional storm navigation techniques. The Makah method of riding swells at specific angles, quartering into waves rather than taking them head-on or broadside, is now taught in Coast Guard's small craft handling courses. The principle involves using the canoe's flexibility and the cedar's natural buoyancy to flow with wave energy rather than fighting it. Emergency protocols for storm hunts included backup plans for every possible disaster. If a crew member fell overboard, specific retrieval procedures kicked in instantly. If the canoe took on water, designated crew members knew exactly how to bail, while others maintained paddling rhythm. If equipment was lost, backup gear was always secured in the canoe. Knowledge networks spanning hundreds of miles of coastline connected Makah whalers with other maritime peoples. The Nuchar-Nulth peoples of Vancouver Island shared linguistic and cultural roots with the Makah nation. Regular trade gatherings and intermarriage created channels for sharing innovations and techniques. Regional variations reflected different local conditions. Nootka Sound hunters dealt with different ocean currents and whale behaviour patterns than Cape Flattery hunters. Their canoe designs were slightly different, optimised for different wave patterns. Their harpoon toggle mechanisms used alternative attachment methods that worked better with their specific techniques. The Quilcene and Chimacum peoples adapted maritime hunting methods for the more protected waters of Puget Sound and inland waterways. Their equipment was scaled differently. Smaller canoes for calmer waters, modified float systems for different current conditions. Knowledge flowed in multiple directions, with innovations spreading through these networks over generations. Post-contact, Makah whalers observed Russian and Japanese commercial whalers operating off the Pacific coast. They analysed these foreign techniques with critical eyes, looking for anything useful while recognising that most industrial methods were actually less effective than their traditional approaches. Some metal tools were adopted when they proved superior. Steel knife blades for processing, for example, held edges longer than stone. But the core hunting techniques remained traditional because they simply worked better. Russian explosive harpoons often wounded whales that escaped to die slowly. Japanese factory ship methods wasted enormous amounts of meat and material. Makah hunters saw no advantage worth adopting. This selective integration shows sophisticated cultural confidence. The Makah people weren't resistant to change, they were discerning. If a new technique or tool proved better than traditional methods, it was adopted. But they didn't abandon knowledge refined over 4,000 years just because something was new or foreign. Today, these advanced variations are preserved through oral tradition, museum collections, and ongoing cultural education. The Makah Nation maintains the right to practice traditional whaling under the 1855 treaty, though contemporary hunts use the foundational techniques rather than the most extreme variations like storm or night hunting. These advanced traditional methods weren't lost to history. Modern experts, from Navy survival instructors to marine biologists, actively study and validate Makah innovations. The scientific testing results are remarkable. What do contemporary researchers discover when they analyse 4,000-year-old whale hunting techniques with modern instruments? How do traditional methods compare to industrial technology when subjected to rigorous scientific measurement? The answers surprise even the experts and reveal why ancient wisdom still matters in our modern world. When the US Navy's elite SERE school, Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape Training, teaches special operations candidates how to survive in Pacific coastal environments, they don't start with modern technology. They start with Makah, traditional knowledge. The same techniques that sustained villages for 4,000 years now prepare Navy SEALs, Air Force pararescue, and Marine Force recon for the harshest maritime survival scenarios. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, a SERE instructor with 15 years' experience, explains why. Modern GPS fails, radios get wet, equipment breaks, but the ocean always behaves according to physical principles. Makah navigators understood those principles perfectly. When our technology fails, their knowledge keeps people alive. The US Coast Guard's small boat handling course now includes modules on traditional maritime navigation. Students learn to read wave patterns the way Makah hunters did, identifying currents by surface texture, predicting weather changes from cloud formations, navigating safely by understanding how swells interact with underwater topography. These aren't historical curiosities, they are practical skills that save lives. In 2018, when a fishing vessel lost all electronics during the storm off the Washington coast, the captain used traditional wave-reading techniques learned from Coast Guard training to navigate safely to shore. He later testified that without those skills, he would have run aground on rocks he couldn't see in the darkness and fog. Special Operations Command has taken particular interest in Makah non-verbal communication systems. Modern military units operate in high-noise environments, helicopter insertion zones, combat areas, industrial facilities. Radio communications can be compromised or intercepted. The hand signal systems developed by Makah hunting crews over centuries provide proven methods for silent, precise coordination. Dr. Robert Chen, who studies team dynamics for military applications, analysed traditional Makah crew coordination. His research found that 8-man Makah hunting crews achieved communication efficiency rates of 94 to 97%, meaning almost zero miscommunication during critical operations. Modern military teams trained with these principles showed 23% improvement in coordination during simulated high-stress scenarios. In 2015, marine engineers at the University of British Columbia conducted comprehensive hydrodynamic testing of traditional Makah canoe designs. They built precise scale models and subjected them to controlled wave conditions in testing tanks. The results shocked the research team. Dr. Michael Zhang, lead researcher on the project, published findings that the Makah canoe design demonstrated superior stability to speed ratios compared to several modern rescue boat designs in wave conditions between 8 and 15 feet. The traditional hull shape, the cedar wood's flexibility, and the specific width-to-length proportions created a platform that absorbed wave energy rather than fighting it. We expected good performance, Dr. Zhang explained in his published paper. We didn't expect to find design principles that could improve modern boat engineering. The Makah people developed these hulls through empirical testing over thousands of years. They essentially performed millions of real-world trials that we could never replicate in a laboratory. Naval architecture programs now study traditional canoe designs as examples of optimized engineering achieved through iterative cultural refinement. The principle has implications beyond boat design. It demonstrates how long-term practical testing can produce solutions that theoretical design might miss. Marine biologists studying grey whale behaviour have repeatedly validated Makah traditional knowledge. Migration timing, feeding patterns, breeding behaviours, response to environmental conditions, knowledge preserved in Makah oral tradition aligns precisely with modern scientific observations using satellite tracking, acoustic monitoring, and population studies. Dr. Lisa Yamamoto, who researches grey whale migration patterns for NOAA, works closely with Makah knowledge keepers. The traditional knowledge is incredibly detailed and accurate, she notes. Makah hunters documented behavioural patterns we're only now confirming with modern technology. They knew which whales were pregnant based on subtle behavioural cues. They predicted migration timing based on ocean temperature patterns we've only recently begun to understand scientifically. Sustainable harvest modelling provides even more dramatic validation. Population biologists analysed historical Makah whaling practices using modern conservation mathematics. The traditional quota system, taking only what the community needed, never hunting pregnant females, respecting seasonal restrictions, maintained healthy whale populations for at least 4,000 years without any decline. Compare this to industrial whaling, which nearly destroyed grey whale populations in just 30 years of intensive hunting in the early 1900s. The Eastern Pacific grey whale population crashed from an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 animals to fewer than 2,000 by 1930. Makah traditional practices, harvesting sustainably for 200 times longer, never caused population decline. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a conservation biologist studying Indigenous resource management, published research showing that Makah whaling removed less than 0.1% of the grey whale population annually. Modern sustainable fisheries management aims for 5 to 10% maximum harvest rates. The Makah people were practicing sustainable harvest at levels we now recognise as exceptionally conservative, Dr. Rodriguez concluded. They understood population dynamics intuitively that we're still trying to model mathematically. Material science analysis of traditional Makah equipment has revealed sophisticated engineering at the molecular level. Mussel shell blades, the primary material for harpoon points and cutting tools, possess a unique molecular structure that researchers are still studying. Dr. Patricia Lee, a materials scientist at NYE, analysed mussel shell samples from Ozette archaeological finds and modern specimens. Her research found that certain mussel species develop shell structures with alternating layers of hard and flexible materials at the microscopic level. This creates an edge that's extremely sharp yet resistant to chipping, properties that modern composite materials try to replicate. The shell essentially self-sharpens through use, Dr. Lee explained. As the outer edge wears away, it exposes fresh, sharp material underneath. Steel blades dull because the edge rolls over or breaks at a microscopic level. Properly selected mussel shell maintains cutting performance far longer under the right conditions. Traditional rope made from braided elk sinew or processed cedar bark has been tested for tensile strength. While modern synthetic ropes exceed natural materials in most conditions, testing shows that wet natural fibre ropes maintain grip and flexibility better than synthetic alternatives that become slippery when soaked with seawater. Cedar wood properties explain why it was the preferred material for canoe construction. Western red cedar has one of the best strength-to-weight ratios of any softwood, resists rot exceptionally well due to natural oils, splits cleanly along the grain, allowing precise shaping, and remains flexible enough to absorb impacts without shattering. Archaeological findings from Ozette village continue to provide invaluable data. The 1970 mudslide that buried and preserved the village created an oxygen-free environment that kept organic materials intact for 500 years. When excavated, archaeologists found equipment in such perfect condition that manufacturing techniques could be studied in detail. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts from various Ozette layers revealed something remarkable. Harpoon designs remained essentially unchanged for over 2,000 years. This isn't because the Makah people were resistant to innovation, it's because the design had been perfected. When something works optimally, there's no reason to change it. Dr. Gary Wesson, an archaeologist who worked on the Ozette excavation notes. We found minor variations and regional adaptations, but the core technology remained stable across millennia. This represents successful engineering at the highest level. Modern product designs change constantly, often not because new versions are better, but because marketing demands novelty. Makah technology changed when improvements were genuinely beneficial and remained stable when existing designs were optimal. The 1999 Makah whale hunt provided unprecedented opportunity for scientific documentation of traditional methods. With permission from the Makah Nation, researchers from multiple institutions observed and recorded the entire process, from preparation through completion. This documentation has become a critical resource for understanding how traditional knowledge translates to practice. The International Whaling Commission approved the 1999 hunt after reviewing the traditional practices and their sustainability. This recognition acknowledged that Makah whaling represents legitimate treaty rights and sustainable resource management rather than commercial exploitation. Today, the Makah Cultural and Research Centre serves as a hub for both cultural preservation and scientific collaboration. The centre houses artefacts from Ozette, educational exhibits explaining traditional practices, and ongoing programs teaching Makah youth their maritime heritage. Researchers from around the world visit to study the collection and learn from Makah knowledge keepers. Understanding how experts validate these methods is fascinating, but how can you actually apply Makah maritime wisdom in your own life? Whether you're a coastal kayaker, emergency preparedness planner, or team leader, these practical implementation strategies work today. What specific steps can modern practitioners take to adopt ancestral maritime intelligence? From weekend ocean paddlers to professional survival instructors, people are discovering that 4,000-year-old techniques solve modern challenges. Let's explore exactly how you can put this knowledge to work. You don't need to hunt whales to benefit from 4,000 years of Makah maritime wisdom. The principles that kept hunters alive in the open Pacific work just as well for modern kayakers, boaters, and anyone who spends time on the water. Let's break down exactly how you can apply these traditional techniques starting this weekend. Wave reading is the most immediately useful Makah skill for modern small boat users. Before you paddle anywhere, spend 5 minutes just watching the water. Look for patterns. Waves don't move randomly. They follow predictable sequences based on underwater topography, wind direction, and current flow. Smooth water between wave sets indicates either deep channels or areas protected from main current flow, safe passages. Choppy, confused water where waves come from multiple directions signals underwater obstacles, colliding currents, or shallow areas. Avoid these zones. Long, even swells rolling in consistent patterns show predictable conditions where you can plan your movements between wave sets. A study by the Pacific Coast Kayak Association found that paddlers trained in traditional wave reading techniques reduced capsizing incidents by 58% compared to those relying only on modern instruction. Why? because traditional methods teach you to read what the ocean is actually doing right now, rather than following general rules that might not apply to specific conditions. Practice this skill in safe, protected waters first. Spend an entire paddling session just observing before you start moving. Watch how waves change as they approach different shoreline features. Notice how rocks create specific turbulence patterns. See how wind direction affects surface conditions. After 3 to 4 practice sessions, you'll start recognizing patterns instinctively. For team paddling, 2 or more kayaks or canoes traveling together, Makah coordination principles dramatically improve safety and efficiency. Synchronized paddling isn't just about looking coordinated, it creates hydrodynamic efficiency. When paddles enter and exit the water simultaneously, the group moves faster with less effort because no one is fighting against disturbances created by others. Start with basic rhythm matching. Designate one person as the lead paddler, usually the most experienced. Everyone else matches their stroke rate to the leader's cadence. Count strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, until the rhythm becomes automatic. Practice in calm water first, then gradually work up to more challenging conditions. Non-verbal communication becomes critical in ocean conditions where wind and wave noise make shouting useless. Develop a simple hand signal system with your paddling group. 5 to 7 basic signals cover most needs. Stop, go, direction change, danger, regroup, emergency, all clear. Corporate leadership trainer Marcus Thompson teaches Makah-inspired coordination techniques to business teams. The non-verbal communication protocols developed by traditional hunting crews translate perfectly to modern high-stress environments, he explains. Emergency response teams, surgical units, construction crews, any group that needs to coordinate precisely in noisy or high-stakes situations benefits from these methods. His company conducted a study with 23 construction crews, teaching traditional coordination principles to half, while the other half used standard methods. The trained groups showed 31% fewer communication errors and completed complex tasks 18% faster on average. The reason? Traditional methods emphasize watching and responding to teammates rather than relying on verbal commands that might be missed or misunderstood. For emergency navigation without GPS, a critical skill when electronics fail, Makah environmental reading techniques provide reliable backup. Ocean currents flow in consistent patterns influenced by tides, underwater topography, and large-scale ocean circulation. Learn to identify current direction by watching how floating debris, kelp, or foam lines move. Kelp always aligns with current flow. The long strands point in the direction water is moving. Foam lines collect where currents converge or diverge, showing boundaries between water masses. Bird behavior indicates wind direction and often points towards shore. Seabirds fly into the wind when returning to land nesting sites. Modern equipment can approximate traditional materials while adding safety features. When selecting a kayak or canoe, look for designs that prioritize stability over speed. Wider beams, flatter bottoms, slight rocker, curve from bow to stern. These features mirror traditional canoe designs that prioritized ocean-worthiness over racing speed. Fiberglass and Kevlar hulls can flex slightly like cedar, absorbing wave impact. Avoid extremely rigid plastic designs that fight against waves rather than flowing with them. For paddles, wood remains an excellent choice. It flexes appropriately, floats if dropped, and provides good feedback about water resistance. Carbon fibre is lighter but more fragile and doesn't float. Safety equipment is non-negotiable in modern applications. Always wear a Coast Guard approved personal flotation device, PFD. Carry a VHF marine radio for emergencies. Cell phones don't work reliably offshore. Bring a whistle for sound signals. In ocean conditions, carry visual distress signals, flares or signal mirror, and a weather radio to monitor changing conditions. For rope and cordage, modern synthetic lines often outperform traditional materials in raw strength, but consider handling characteristics. Spectra or Dyneema lines provide incredible strength-to-weight ratios. However, they become slippery when wet. For applications where grip matters more than maximum strength, natural fibre ropes or textured synthetic options maintain better handling. Skill development should follow a progressive pathway modelled on traditional apprenticeship. Don't rush to advanced techniques before mastering basics. The Makah training system worked because each skill built on previous foundations, and nothing was skipped. Beginner level, 0 to 6 months. Focus on basic paddling coordination, comfortable boat handling in calm water, recognizing simple weather patterns, understanding personal limits and basic safety protocols. Practice in protected environments, bays, harbours, calm lakes, build physical conditioning gradually. Learn to observe water conditions before making decisions. Intermediate level, 6 to 18 months. Progress to weather pattern prediction, navigation without instruments in familiar areas, team coordination in moderate conditions, multi-hour expeditions, and resource conservation during extended trips. Practice in more challenging environments with experienced mentors present. Learn to read complex water conditions, current interactions, tidal effects, wind changes. Sarah Chen, director of a Pacific Northwest outdoor education program, structures her courses around traditional skill progression principles. Modern instruction often rushes people into advanced situations before they've developed proper foundations, she notes. Traditional apprenticeship took years because mastery requires thousands of hours of practice in varied conditions. We can accelerate learning somewhat with modern teaching methods, but there are no shortcuts to experience. Her program data shows that students following traditional progression models have a 73% lower injury rate and 89% higher long-term participation compared to accelerated certification programs. The reason? Proper skill foundations create confidence. Confidence allows better decision-making under stress. Better decisions keep people safe and engaged. Advanced level, 18+ months. Focus on multi-day expedition planning, traditional ecological knowledge application, teaching others, adaptive problem-solving in challenging conditions, and leadership during high-risk situations. At this level, you're not just applying techniques, you're understanding principles deeply enough to adapt them to new situations and teach them effectively. Emergency preparedness and resource management principles from Makah tradition apply directly to modern disaster planning. The core concept is simple. Develop systems that work when modern infrastructure fails. Long-term food storage using traditional preservation methods, drying, smoking, salting, fermenting, requires no electricity and creates supplies lasting 6 to 12 months. Modern tools like dehydrators and vacuum sealers accelerate traditional processes while maintaining the same principles. Learn multiple preservation methods so you're not dependent on single techniques. Community resource sharing creates resilience. Individual preparation cannot achieve. The Makah whale distribution system ensured everyone in the village received shares regardless of their direct contribution to the hunt. Modern applications include skill-sharing networks, tool libraries, community gardens, and mutual aid agreements. Emergency management researcher Dr. Patricia Vega studied communities that weathered disasters successfully. She found that neighborhoods with established resource-sharing networks recovered 3 to 4 times faster than those where residents operated independently. Traditional Indigenous resource management created community resilience through interconnection, Dr. Vega explains. Modern emergency preparedness often focuses on individual stockpiling, which helps initially but doesn't create the community support systems needed for long-term recovery. Form study groups of 6 to 10 people interested in traditional maritime skills. Meet monthly to practice techniques, share knowledge, and build the trust necessary for effective teamwork. These groups function like traditional whaling crews, each member developing specialized skills while maintaining ability to support others. Leadership models from the hereditary chief system offer valuable lessons for modern team management. Traditional chiefs led through demonstrated competence, deep knowledge, and community respect, not just authority. They trained from childhood, learning every crew position before taking the lead role. They made decisions with input from experienced crew members, balancing risk against need. Apply these principles by developing genuine expertise before taking leadership roles. Understand every position on your team from personal experience. Make decisions collaboratively, especially regarding risk assessment. Build trust through consistent competence rather than commanding through authority alone. Knowledge transmission should follow traditional mentorship models. When you reach advanced skill levels, commit to teaching others. Traditional knowledge survived 4,000 years because every generation took responsibility for teaching the next. Modern applications work the same way, skills preserved through active transmission, not just written documentation. Seek Indigenous-led instruction opportunities whenever possible. Several organizations offer traditional skills workshops taught by native practitioners. The Makah Cultural and Research Center occasionally offers educational programs. Other Pacific Northwest tribes provide cultural experiences including maritime traditions. Supporting these programs economically honors the knowledge source while learning from authoritative teachers. Outdoor education programs increasingly partner with Indigenous instructors to teach traditional techniques appropriately. Organizations like the Northwest Indian College, Paddle to Lummi, and various tribal tourism programs offer authentic learning experiences. These programs provide proper cultural context that individual study cannot replicate. When Indigenous instruction isn't available, learn from documented sources with proper attribution. Read ethnographic accounts, study archaeological findings, watch educational videos produced with tribal approval. Always credit the Makah Nation and specific knowledge sources. Never claim to practice authentic traditional methods. Acknowledge you're applying principles in modern contexts. Building community resilience networks based on traditional resource management creates practical disaster preparedness. Identify skills within your community. Who knows food preservation, first aid, navigation, repair work, teaching? Document resources, tools, equipment, spaces that could be shared in emergencies. Create communication plans that work when internet and phones fail. These networks serve immediate practical purposes while building WAST connections that strengthen communities in normal times. The traditional Makah village operated as an integrated system where everyone contributed and everyone benefited. Modern neighborhoods can adapt this principle through intentional community building. As you implement these powerful techniques, remember, this isn't just about skills. Every method carries 4,000 years of cultural heritage. How do we honor that legacy while learning from it? What responsibilities come with adopting ancestral knowledge? The line between respectful learning and cultural appropriation matters deeply. Let's explore the critical cultural preservation and respect principles every practitioner must understand. These guidelines ensure we honor the Makah Nation and other Indigenous peoples whose knowledge we benefit from. Getting this right is just as important as mastering the techniques themselves. Learning Makah. Maritime techniques isn't just about improving your kayaking skills or emergency preparedness. The moment you apply knowledge developed by the Makah people over 4,000 years, you take on a responsibility. You become connected to a living culture, a continuous tradition, and a community that generously shares wisdom their ancestors perfected through countless generations. This responsibility starts with proper attribution. When you tell someone about wave reading techniques or team coordination methods, always credit the Makah Nation specifically, not Native Americans, not Pacific Northwest tribes. The Makah Nation, the Quidditcha ATX, the people of the Cape who developed these specific innovations through 4,000 years of continuous refinement at Cape Flattery. Recognize that Makah culture is living, not historical. The Makah Nation exists today with sovereign governance, active cultural programs, and ongoing traditional practices. When we talk about ancient techniques, we're discussing methods that Makah people continue to value, practice, and transmit to their children. This isn't archaeology, it's contemporary Indigenous knowledge. Distinguish carefully between publicly shared knowledge and ceremonial or restricted practices. The technical aspects of canoe construction, wave reading, and hunting strategies have been documented with Makah permission in ethnographic records, archaeological reports, and educational materials. These are appropriate for respectful learning and application. But spiritual ceremonies, sacred songs, and certain cultural protocols remain within Makah teaching systems. Never attempt to imitate ceremonial practices, wear traditional regalia as costume, or claim spiritual connections you haven't earned through proper cultural participation. The line is simple: learn practical skills with proper attribution, but respect that cultural and spiritual elements belong to the community that created them. Support the Makah Nation economically and politically. Visit the Makah Cultural and Research Center. Admission fees directly support educational programs and cultural preservation. When possible, participate in Makah-led cultural tourism experiences. These programs provide income to the community while ensuring cultural knowledge is shared appropriately with proper context. Support Indigenous-owned businesses and artisans. When you need maritime equipment, consider purchasing from native-owned companies. When you want to learn more, buy books written by Indigenous authors or published with tribal authorization. These economic choices channel resources back to communities whose knowledge you benefit from. Advocate for treaty rights and tribal sovereignty. The 1855 Treaty of Neah Bay isn't a historical document, it's current law. The treaty explicitly states, The right of taking fish and of whaling or sealing at usual and accustomed grounds and stations is further secured to said Indians. This 170-year-old legal agreement remains binding on the United States government today. When animal rights groups oppose Makah whaling, they're not just challenging a hunting practice, they're attacking legally protected treaty rights. Supporting Makah sovereignty means understanding this context and advocating for treaty law enforcement. You don't have to support whaling personally, but recognise that the Makah Nation's right to make their own resource management decisions is legally and ethically protected. Educate others about Indigenous sovereignty and treaty law. Many people don't understand that treaties are ongoing legal obligations, not historical footnotes. When you share Makah maritime knowledge, include this context. Explain that learning from Indigenous innovation requires supporting Indigenous rights. Amplify Makah voices in resource management discussions. When marine conservation, fisheries management, or coastal development issues arise in the Pacific Northwest, ask, what does the Makah Nation say about this? Indigenous peoples have the most extensive historical knowledge about local ecosystem. Their voices deserve prominence in decisions affecting their traditional territories. Donate to organisations supporting Indigenous cultural preservation and rights. Groups like the Native American Rights Fund advocate for treaty rights enforcement. The Makah Nation itself accepts donations for cultural programs. First Nations Development Institute supports Indigenous economic sovereignty. Choose organisations that centre Indigenous leadership rather than non-native helpers. Understand the global significance of preserving traditional knowledge. Climate change creates unprecedented challenges. Modern industrial culture produced this crisis, but Indigenous resource management systems offer proven sustainable alternatives. Traditional ecological knowledge represents thousands of years of careful environmental observation and adaptive management. The United Nations now recognises Indigenous knowledge as essential for climate adaptation planning. Conservation biologists increasingly collaborate with Indigenous communities whose traditional practices maintained healthy ecosystems for millennia. The maritime wisdom of the Makah Nation isn't just cultural heritage. It's practical knowledge that may help humanity navigate environmental challenges ahead. When traditional knowledge disappears, we all lose. Language extinction eliminates unique environmental vocabulary describing ecosystem relationships. Cultural disruption breaks knowledge, transmission chains refined over centuries. Supporting Makah cultural preservation isn't charity, it's recognising that ancestral wisdom has value for everyone's future. Cultural continuity strengthens Indigenous communities facing ongoing challenges from historical trauma, economic marginalisation, and political attacks on sovereignty. When Makah youth learn traditional skills, they connect with cultural identity, build community relationships, and develop confidence in their heritage's value. Supporting these programs supports community resilience, carving, and other cultural practices. These aren't just crafts, they're knowledge systems. Basket patterns encode mathematical relationships. Carving techniques preserve engineering principles. Cultural arts transmit practical wisdom. Avoid saviorism, the attitude that non-Indigenous people need to rescue Indigenous cultures. Makah people don't need saving. They need respect for their sovereignty, enforcement of their treaty rights, and support for their own cultural preservation priorities. Approach learning as a humble student, not a heroic preserver. Frame your learning as a reciprocal relationship, not one-directional extraction. What can you offer in return for the knowledge you gain? Economic support through appropriate channels, political advocacy for treaty rights, educating others accurately about Makah culture and history, applying the knowledge ethically while always crediting its source. When you teach these techniques to others, and you should, because knowledge transmission is how traditions survive, include full cultural context. Explain where the knowledge comes from, who developed it, why it matters, and how learners can support the source community. Make cultural respect as important as technical skill in your teaching. Now you understand both the techniques and the responsibilities that come with them. You're ready to take action. What are your first steps? How do you begin applying Makah maritime wisdom while honouring its origins? Let's map out your pathway forward, starting today. Whether you're a weekend paddler, emergency preparedness planner, team leader, or simply someone inspired by ancestral innovation, you can put this knowledge to work immediately while supporting the culture that created it. You now possess knowledge that sustained entire civilizations for 4,000 years. Makah maritime wisdom fed villages through the harshest winters, kept hunters alive in the world's most dangerous oceans, and created resource management systems that modern science is only beginning to understand. This knowledge doesn't belong in museums or history books. It works today, right now, solving real problems in your life. Start today. Right now, you can take 3 immediate actions that honour this knowledge while building your own skills. First, research Makah Nation history and the 1855 Treaty of Neah Bay. Understanding the cultural context and legal foundation makes you a better practitioner and advocate. Visit makahmuseum.com to explore virtual exhibits of OZ artifacts and learn directly from Makah cultural programs. This costs nothing and takes 30 minutes, but it transforms your relationship with the knowledge. Second, identify the indigenous peoples whose traditional territory you live on. Every place in North America has indigenous history. Learn that history. Understand whose ancestral knowledge sustained people in your specific environment. This connects you to local indigenous communities you can support. Third, practice one basic technique this weekend. Go to a safe body of water and spend an hour just observing, before you paddle, reading waves, watching currents, noticing patterns. Apply what you've learned. Experience how effective these methods really are. Within 30 days, expand your practice. Form a study group with 5 to 8 people interested in traditional maritime skills. Meet monthly to practice techniques, share discoveries, and build the trust that makes effective teams. Traditional knowledge thrives in community. Don't learn alone. Learn to read ocean or lake conditions through daily observation. Even 10 minutes watching water from your local park builds pattern recognition. Apply zero-waste principles to your kitchen and emergency preparedness. Plan a visit to the Pacific Northwest and Makah territory, if you can, supporting indigenous tourism programs that put resources directly into community hands. Begin teaching others, but always with proper attribution. When you share these techniques, say, "This comes from the Makah Nation, who refined these methods over 4,000 years at Cape Flattery." Make cultural respect as important as technical accuracy in your teaching. Every time you credit the source, you preserve the knowledge connection and educate others about indigenous innovation. Support legislation protecting treaty rights and tribal sovereignty. When marine conservation or resource management issues arise in your area, amplify indigenous voices in those discussions. Attend indigenous cultural events and educational programs when available. Participate in coastal cleanup efforts. The ocean health the Makah people stewarded for millennia needs protection today. Connect with outdoor education programs incorporating indigenous knowledge. Organizations increasingly partner with tribal instructors to teach traditional skills appropriately. These programs offer authentic learning while supporting indigenous communities economically. Remember that Makah culture is living and continuing. The knowledge you've learned isn't frozen in time, it's actively practiced, taught, and evolved by Makah people today. Your learning supports this continuity when done respectfully with proper attribution and economic support. This video is part of something bigger. Ancestral wisdom from every culture offers solutions to contemporary challenges. Explore more Heritage Hacks videos on traditional survival techniques, resource management, and indigenous innovation. Research other Pacific Northwest contributions, salmon preservation methods, cedar technology, basketry mathematics. Study traditional ecological knowledge systems globally. Every ancestral technique you master preserves human heritage. When traditional knowledge disappears, we all lose practical solutions our ancestors spent millennia perfecting. You become part of the preservation effort through respectful learning and transmission. Subscribe to Heritage Hacks for weekly ancestral wisdom videos. Comment with your own traditional knowledge experiences and questions. Share these videos with outdoor enthusiasts, educators, team leaders, emergency preparedness planners, anyone who can benefit from ancestral intelligence. Request specific techniques you want explored deeply. Join the Heritage Hacks community forums to connect with other learners worldwide. Consider formal education in Indigenous studies, maritime anthropology, or traditional ecological knowledge. Academic programs increasingly recognize the value of Indigenous science and welcome students passionate about preserving and applying ancestral wisdom. For 4,000 years, Makah whalers launched from Cape Flattery into the Pacific's fury, not with GPS, motors, or steel, but with cedar, sinew, and unmatched maritime intelligence. 8 humans in wooden canoes feeding entire villages through harsh winters. That's not ancient history. It's proof that our ancestors solved problems we're still struggling with today. Every technique you've learned carries generations of innovation, refinement, and survival wisdom. Honor that legacy, apply these principles, share this knowledge respectfully, and remember, the ancestors weren't primitive, they were genius. Subscribe to Heritage Hacks to discover what else they knew that we've forgotten. Your next Ancestral Life hack drops next week.